All right, Unbound, Anne E. Berg, page 323. Sometimes Samuel or one of the other men from the settlement come by to help lift logs or make cement from the mud and crushed oyster shells that we gather from the bog. We share what food we have, and the men return to the settlement. Only Brooklyn stays with us. On days that they don't hunt, him and Uncle Jim take the boys to fish in the stream. Sometimes Brooklyn stays behind to show Mama and me how to dry and pound cattail roots to make flour, or how to boil them like taters. But always at night, resting 'neath the stars, we whisper our stories. I tell him about Jordan and his baby girl that he'll never see again. I tell him about Aunt Tempe, and Aunt Sarah and Uncle Moses and Anna, and about Master and Mrs. and her dishes what come all the way from England, and her bed what's got a roof over it. It's called a canopy bed, Brooklyn says. The Master had one. Brooklyn knows lots of things that I don't. He even taught himself to read by listening to his master's children reciting their letters and watching his master's children write their names. It's confusing at first, he says, but I can teach you. Now when we finish building for the day, when the squirrel's been gutted and the fish been smoked and the dandelions crushed for coffee or cut for soup, we clear a space to write letters in the dirt. If Willie's nearby, he listens and watches. Brooklyn shows him the letter that starts his name. So sometimes a row of upside-down mountains circle Willie's pictures. Willie and wagon and whee, Brooklyn says, lifting Willie up and spinning him around. Willie laughs, but only softly, like a bell what's covered in feathers. Sometimes I wonder if Brooklyn's thinking of his own little brothers and feeling that same heaving sorrow that I felt when I moved to the big house. Finally, our cabin's finished. It's bigger than the cabin that we left behind, and it's lifted off the ground with vine and log stairs, and they sway when we climb 'em, and a roof what looks like a hat made of grass. A giant cypress stands guard out front. The first time we climb in, Uncle Jim takes off his hat. We all hold hands, even Thomas and Willie, and Mama thanks the good Lord for keeping us safe. Remember, too, she says, Sarah, old George Cooper, and all the folks that we left behind. Brooklyn makes ready to go back to the settlement, but Mama asks him to stay. The boys love you, she says. We all do, and there's room here. There's plenty of room. I haven't learned all my letters yet, I say, feeling my face boiling. Uncle Jim puts his hand on Brooklyn's shoulders. I could use the help, son. Well, sir, if Samuel... I already asked him, Uncle Jim says. The only rule is... You gotta call me Uncle Jim. Tears fill Brooklyn's eyes, but his smile is wider than the moon. Well, sir, I mean Uncle Jim, then I accept. Samuel and Maddie have been so good to me, and he lifts Thomas into his arms. But I sure do miss having brothers. That night, we all sleep under one roof, alert for the sounds of wolves or wildcats, but safe from the lash of the master's whip and sheltered by walls made of palmetto leaves and love. A few weeks after we finish building our cabin, I'm lying in the dark, pondering and listening for wildcats what might come devour us. And I hear a soft rustling sound in my heart. Pounds inside my head. I sit up. In the corner, Uncle Jim sleeps peacefully, his homemade spear at one side and Mama on the other. I peek through our grass wall. Brooklyn sits alone in the moonlight. Careful, I step over Thomas and slip outside. What you doing out here? I ask, making room for myself on a moldering log. Above us, the full moon sits on the treetop like a giant white clover. The air's moist and still. Can't sleep, Brooklyn says. Lots of nights I lie awake wondering where they are. My mother, my brothers, and my father. What happened to them? Well, they's somewhere, I say, and I bet they's thinking of you every day. The things that we love, we keep buried in our hearts. Brooklyn nods. My brothers were little, so maybe they'll forget, but I won't. And I'll know my mama and daddy won't forget either. Each of us sits quiet, pondering the folks that's buried in our hearts. How long you been living with Uncle Jim? Brooklyn asks finally. About 5 years. Uncle Jim's the only father I ever knowed. I smile. He'll take good care of you too. I think of Brooklyn teaching himself to read and escaping without a family to give him hope and shelter. Course, it don't seem like you need much caring for. Everybody needs caring for. Brooklyn says. Especially white folks, I say. They can't do anything for themselves. Swift as a feathered arrow, I hear Aunt Tempe's voice crossing the swamp to scold me. Judging folks by the color of their skin is wrong, no matter who's doing the judging. A snarl snort and screech that must be fighting raccoons interrupts my thoughts, but finally Brooklyn starts talking again. Sometimes it feels like my mama never existed, like I never existed, always hiding or leaving a trace of who I am or where I've been. He buries his bare feet in a mat of leaves. It's like we don't exist. I wish I could say something to make Brooklyn feel better. That we exist the same as the moon and stars, I say. Brooklyn shakes his head and he looks at me and his eyes glisten like rainwater that collects in moldering leaves. It doesn't matter, Grace. No one will remember us. No one will even know that we're here. Oof, that's deep.